So this month we have been able to revive our very popular Mohair blend yarn lines. It used to be called Chabris, and we also had a line called Kaviku. They were our Mohair blends, named after French cheeses. um, and we just loved them. We loved making them. People liked knitting with them. They're very soft. And then we moved on from the mill relationship that we had, who was making them, and also our Mohair supplier at the time. His prices just went through the roof, and the yarns were going to be costing, they were going to have to retail for over $50 a skein, and we just couldn't really justify that in our, for our customers. So we set about on the hunt for a new combination of supplier and mill that we could make our yarns with again, our Mohair yarns with again, because personally, I just love Mohair. I know it's got a bad name even among knitters who use it. There's a lot of scratchy Brillo pad Mohair out there. That brushed Mohair that's commercially available is honestly mostly probably far lower grade Mohair than what we try to get for our yarn, which is also tells you about the price difference in maybe in our yarn versus the bigger companies that put out that yarn. But the difference here really is in not just the quality, but the softness. So our Mohair it's interesting because you would think, oh, kid Mohair, that's the best. And it is. It's so soft and lovely, but it doesn't behave well. It doesn't marry well with other fibers necessarily. And it doesn't behave as well in the spinning equipment. It can be kind of slippery. So we don't actually go looking for kid Mohair. We prefer to get yearling Mohair, which is, once the goats have passed a year and maybe they've been clipped once, the hair is just a little coarser, which is in this case a good thing. Like overly fine fiber doesn't pass well through the larger spinning machinery. And the thing about goats is that, and I'll go into the history of all this a little bit more, but the thing about goat is that it is classified by kid is the first clip. It's a baby goat up to a year that hasn't been shorn before, and the ends of the fiber are versions, so they're rounded when they first come out. And that's true of sheep too. Lamb's wool is similar in that once you cut it once, it's got a sharper end on it, just like if you slice off a piece of asparagus and it's got that, kind of pointy end. So once it's been shorn once, and it reaches about a year old, it starts to be classified as yearling. And that's actually determined by the micron count of the fiber itself. So by the diameter of the fiber. And then past a year, everything after that is considered adult goat, in which case it's usually even a little coarser. Now, that said, those really are classifications of the fiber and not necessarily the age of the animal. So people who raise goats and are raising goats for fiber, will try to keep their adult goats producing yearling fiber far into their adult age. And likewise, even some yearling can be considered kid micron count, even when it doesn't have that lovely rounded tip. So we can often get yearling fiber from goats that are 3-4 years old, and the producer we worked with previously had even 5-year-old goats that were still producing yearling fiber, which is, and whether a fiber is fine and has good structure and is really nice for making yarn with also depends on environmental factors like diet and weather and, you know, whether they've had babies that year, just like it does for sheep. So that's a little bit about the fiber. Angora goats, which is the goat that produces mohair, produce a variety of colors from their coat. There are blacks, and black covers the whole range of black, charcoal gray, silver gray, pale gray, white and brown, and also reds. Reds tend to be reddest when they're born and often will turn very pale or white even 3-4 weeks into their growth. So reds do lose that color early. And if you're going to get any red, it's usually within the very, very first clip at a very young age. So that will depend on whether you can clip them and during a time of year when they can still stay warm enough. And so it's kind of a rare, the red is a little bit more rare. And then there are the brown goats, which are reddish brown and sometimes more chocolatey as well. So the brown goats have a little more variety. One of the interesting things about goats, even more than sheep, is that the coloring, the genetics of the coloring is completely chaotic. So even people who raise goats, you know, for generations within a family have a really hard time predicting the color. Like I said, red goats that have those genetics can turn, you know, kind of a buttery white shade by the time they're 3 months old and stay that color their whole life. So only if you see one of those goats right next to a brilliantly white, genetically white goat can you tell the difference. And many goats can produce spots on their in their fleeces that kind of take over. So it was put to me this way by our previous producer who we had just the wonderful opportunity to go to his farm and do a lot of photography and video and talk to him all day long about his goats. And I see him at shows and he's always really generous with his knowledge, especially if he learns something new. But he was like, yeah, you can have a black goat that that looks entirely black, you know, like Charles here. His goats all had names. And he's like, but genetically, what you're really seeing is a white goat with a really, really big black spot. So he's like, I can dig in there and see no white flesh and no white hair, but it's genetically still a white goat. So unless you have the genetic profile of every single goat in your flock, it's really hard to breed for color between goats. You just kind of have to give it a whirl and see what comes out. And he's, you know, and on top of that, some goats will breed more predictably than others. So so basically his strategy was to just to breed for color overall. He had a fairly large flock, about half to 2/3 would be colored goats at any one time. And he was always just happy to take whatever they would give, you know. So that's kind of a really interesting, and I don't know how, that's a really interesting way to look at it, is just let them just be what they are and we'll sort it out after shearing, you know. Goats are usually sheared. So Angora goats grow a very long hair coat. They don't have an undercoat. They don't produce any undercoat. They are a particular kind of goat that produces only a hair coat, but it's a very soft, fluffy, curly hair coat. Some of them grow ringlet style locks, and some of them grow a more, it's an S-shaped lock that reverses on itself. So a proper lock from that would be a flat lock of hair that has a very curvy shape. And the hair will just continue growing. So they do need to be sheared twice a year generally. You can shear them once a year and get a foot long fleece, but you can't have that spun commercially. So most commercial mills can spin fiber that's up to 6 inches long, and some mills even limit it to 5 inches. And so depending on that, your producer may shear 2 or even 3 times per year, depending on how your mill prefers the fleece to arrive. It's the fiber itself is like I said, it's a long wool, basically a long fiber. So like long wool from sheep, the scales along the hair shaft tend to be thinner and longer and more closely compacted to the hair shaft. And that gives it both a resiliency and a durability, but also that wonderful glossy sheen that you see in mohair. And honestly, and it's one of the reasons I love mohair so much, it really fairly sparkles. It's just such beautiful fiber. And when you hold, even in your skein, when you hold it up to the light, and especially in the sunlight, the little bit of halo that's coming off the fiber will absolutely sparkle in the light. And as you and when you knit with it and handle it and wash it and block it, more of those ends will loosen from the yarn and bloom out. So you'll get that really nice halo, and your fabrics will have this wonderful, it lights up. That's the only way I can really describe it. And that's one of the reasons I love it so much for lace, because with all those holes and fancy stitches, you've got lots of opportunity for that halo to come out and to catch light as light passes through the fabric, and to just, the whole thing just becomes kind of illuminated. This mohair is spun mohair, meaning it's not brushed out. So it's not like the very, very fluffy mohair that you might get commercially. That mohair is spun in a special process that uses a very fine nylon core, like a 2-ply core of nylon, in which the fiber is sort of thrown in against it and caught into the core. So it literally does look like one of those bottle brushes. The yarn structure itself has the appearance of a bottle brush. This yarn is spun mohair, in which the mohair is treated just like any other fiber and spun along its length. So it's twisted as you go. Because mohair is a long wool and it has less crimp, it has more of a curve or a S shape than a crimp. It tends to work better if it's spun a little more loosely. So with a little more relaxed twist to it, that will also allow it to bloom. And whereas in some wools, like merino, if you spin it very softly, it will cause it to pill more and felt more easily, because you're leaving more of the fiber ends out there. With mohair, the soft spin allows space for the fiber to bloom, and that bloom will interconnect. Those fibers will interconnect and form a strong network that helps the yarn be durable despite the soft spin. And long wools you can expect the same thing from long wools. The bloom on these fibers, the halo that that forms as you handle it and wash it, can be even thought of as like when you pour concrete, you have usually a rebar network within the concrete that's strengthening it, where the rebar is woven together and then the concrete is poured on it, and the whole thing is stronger because of that infrastructure that you've added. And the bloom of wool and mohair also acts the same way in your hand knits. So when you knit something with this yarn at a maybe what you think of as a looser gauge, by the time you finish knitting it, soak it really well, block it, and maybe even slap it around a little bit, that those fibers will spring out of the twist of the yarn and lock together, not in a felting way because it doesn't felt easily, but in a way that supports the fabric and gives it a little bit of infrastructure. That's one of the reasons woolen spun yarns work so well for color work, for instance, because they meld stitches together in a way that gives you that cohesive surface that you're looking for. In the case of the mohair, it just lightens up the fabric itself so much. Mohair is kind of like alpaca in that it is a heavier fiber, you know, it has some weight to it, but the fact that that when it's spun a little bit with a little bit less twist and when it blooms, it really lightens up when it's blocked and washed. And because of its durability, the long wool being so strong, it can be blocked extremely vigorously. Or rigorously. You can stretch it and it will relax out. It doesn't have a lot of crimp to fight you there, but you can really stretch it quite a bit. It's pretty amazing. When I block different fibers, it's always interesting to me how much the long wools and the non-wools like mohair and alpaca and cashmere, how much they will grow compared to like merino. I've said it before, but you can expect merino, for instance, to grow about 25% when you block it and you stretch it, when you're actively looking to stretch it. Whereas mohair and alpaca will grow like 40%, or and cashmere and yak and things like that will grow as much as 50%. So sometimes that gain is figured into the pattern making itself. A lot of my rectangular scarves were designed for specific fibers, and so expecting those fibers to grow to a certain length, if you're actually switching yarns and switching to a completely different a fiber with a completely different behavior pattern, you might need to like adjust the length of your scarf so that you end up with a similar length to the original. And that's, you know, just an aside, but I even noticed it when I knit the 2 samples for the new shawl pattern, the birds in a thicket. The Kent lace version and the mohair lace version. Now, these 2 yarns, the Kent lace and the mohair lace, are spun to pretty much identical specs. They have the Kent is 40% Romney wool and 60% merino, and the mohair is 40% mohair and 60% merino. And it's the same merino, you know, it's combed merino top that's that's made in the US, and they block similarly because Romney is a long wool and it's also a luster fiber, but when they're unpinned and kind of sit around for a while, even the Romney tends to soften in that woolly way. You know, it contracts back just a little bit. The fabric has a little more density, where the mohair will just hold its blocked shape, you know, kind of no matter what you do to it. It doesn't respond to humidity and use the way wool does. And that's one of the other things I just love about it, is that you block it and it stays that way. You know, you block those holes open. So between the two shawls, they look very similar, but the mohair one definitely has more open, the lace stitches are a little more open to me when I look at it. And the other thing that surprised me was with spun mohairs, you don't see that luster in the fiber quite as much in the yarn when it's in the skein and when you're working with it. You know, you really have to hold it up to the light to see that reflection of light. But after I blocked it and got it on the dress form and started taking photographs, the shine that was coming off of it in the photographs was just amazing. And when you compare the two fabrics in photographs, that gleaming, you know, shine is definitely present in the mohair, where it's not quite the same in the Romney blend. So it's kind of interesting. Sometimes you have to see something through, well, literally a different lens to really see it. Now, any questions about the yarn, or, you know, anything I've said so far? Anybody?
And I'm wondering, Anne, if the mohair is less likely to pill than the Romney.
It is, yeah. I mean, Romney is also very resistant to pilling, but yes, mohair is less resistant. Now, keep in mind, it is blended with merino, so there's, you know, when you knit it into a shawl, you're not going to get a lot of pilling on a shawl, unless, you know, you always wear it with a handbag over it or something. But in a garment, you may see a bit of pilling, but the pills just come right off. You know, generally with pilling in our yarns, what I see is the first year that I wear something, there's a crop of pills, and, you know, if I brush them off, that's it. You know, it doesn't really pill much at all after that. But yes, in and of itself, mohair is highly resistant to pilling. And that's why, you know, there's a lot of lower grade mohair out there, but it makes for wonderful, they use it throughout many industries for soundproofing and upholstery. And for many years, it was the #1 fabric for car upholstery, because its durability was so high. You know, they make that nice flush upholstery fabric that they can kind of, it has a nap to it like a carpet, but they can cut it down real close, almost like a velvet. And it's very durable. And mohair has come back big time in interior design in the last 5 to 10 years. It always was, like in the 1940s, that kind of style of Art Deco furniture. A lot of that upholstery was kind of mohair and that plush fabric. Then that went away for a while, and people didn't want any natural fibers in their home goods. But we've been getting back to that, you know, high end, especially interior fabrics there's a big demand on the mohair industry from that sector, textiles. And it's also used as a substitute for fur. So you can make a really deceiving fur fabric with mohair that, you know, they use it for, like on stage, for instance, they'll use mohair to make things that look like fur. Because just like wool, it's not flammable, you know, it can't catch on fire. and it's a little safer and more comfortable to wear than actual fur on stage. That was something I learned when I worked in costuming decades ago. It was really interesting to me. All the different ways that they can make things look like fur. Anybody else have a question about the fiber or the yarn?
I do. Oh, go ahead, Gika.
Oh, you said something about it has an S-shaped lock, but then it reverses on itself. What
Yeah,
do you mean by that?
well, the lock starts as an S shape and then it curls back on itself and goes the other way in an S shape. So like one of the things they judge, like if they're judging animal fleeces at a fair, they look for that confirmation of a certain lock shape. And so it doesn't just go back and forth all the way down it goes back and forth and then it reverses and it goes back the other way. So it doesn't actually curl unless it's a ringlet type. The flat lock mohair has in the middle this C-shaped reversal of its lock. I think I don't have a picture of it here. I may have included a picture of it in the book chapter that I did on it. And I believe the mohair chapter occurs in B&K 2014. I'm not positive, but I think it's 2014. Jean, what was your question?
Yeah, so my question is, so the growth issue. So it can grow more than merino, but after it's blocked, then it's stable because it's connected to each other, like the structure has been created.
Right. So
Okay.
long wools and mohair and other hair fibers don't they don't recover like merino has that crimp. It's that really tight zigzaggy crimp.
Mhm.
And that will it's like an accordion. It wants to constantly spring back to that memory. Now fibers that have a much more gentle crimp or curve to them are not going to want to pull back as tightly as like a merino or a corriedale or targhee, something like that. Long wools and mohair and silk is another fiber, that protein fiber that doesn't have any crimp. Once you stretch them, they will stay fairly relaxed. So alpaca is another one too. Even alpaca that has crimp will relax out and not want to recover as much. So once you pin it out, it will keep its shape much better.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like I'm trying to think of an example. Oh, I mean, one thing I can think of is, you know, when you make bread dough and the gluten is really lively and fresh, it will constantly want to spring back. When you're trying to like make a pizza crust, it will constantly kind of pull back. But once that gluten has sort of spent itself, or the yeast has spent itself a bit, you can spread that dough out and it will stay a little bit better. Audrey?
Yeah, my question is, if you have someone who's kind of sensitive to the itch of different wools, is mohair going to seem higher on the itch factor?
I guess that's really personal. I have some experience with that because I just find over time, as much as I love these fibers, I cannot wear cashmere and alpaca, especially right next to my neck or right against my skin. It's not that I get a rash or anything. I just feel like bugs are crawling all over me, and I just
And
can't
you're wanting to go like this all the time?
Yeah, or my skin does get itchy, even if it doesn't get inflamed.
Yeah.
And that's true even if I wear a sweater over like a turtleneck. It just, something about those fibers doesn't agree with me, but I can wear mohair just fine. So it's definitely not the prickliness of the fiber that's getting to me. It's something about the chemical, it's something about the fiber itself. And I've tried all different alpacas, and, I haven't tried like millions of cashmeres, but I've probably tried maybe 10 different cashmeres, and I just can't wear it. And it makes me miserable because it's so cozy and warm, but it just doesn't work for me. But mohair, I can wear that over my naked skin. It doesn't bother me at all. It's just, and I think some other factors about wearing prickly fiber is if you're wearing them in the wrong temperature, if you do get kind of hot under the collar and your skin gets humid, it's going to bother you more when something's prickly. Where, if you wear it, if you use it for outerwear accessories like a scarf, and you wear those things out in the cold, they're just not going to bother your skin quite as much as if you're wearing it when it's too hot. That said, that's my personal experience with it. I certainly respect that people have all individual reactions to that stuff, and that if you tend to be not okay with prickly fibers, maybe save your mohair for blankets or gifts for other
Or
people.
make sure it's something I want to wear once I give it to someone.
Yeah. Mohair definitely doesn't bother my hands when I knit with it at all. So, and that's a clue to me. Like when I knit with alpaca, I can only knit with it for so long, and my fingers start to burn at the tips. And I don't knit a lot with cashmere, so I can't testify the same experience with cashmere as with certainty like I can with alpaca.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody
I like
else?
the idea of just making something I like enough that it'll come back to me.
Exactly. Or figure out a way you can wear it. And I feel the same way, when people say, oh, that's not my color. It's like, well, put it on your feet, or, wear it on your hands. Like everything doesn't have to go with your face. Okay. One of the interesting things about goats is that the goats that produce mohair are a specific kind of goat, the Angora goat, which originated in Southwest Asia and Eastern Europe. So they are one of the earliest domesticated animals, goats in general. And the Angora, I'm sorry, I said something wrong. So goats in general are one of the oldest domesticated animals, and they seem to have originated in Southwest Asia and Eastern Europe. Angora goats, which are a very specific kind of goat, were cultivated in kind of the cradle of humanity in the Middle East and Africa. Angora goats, like I said before, are distinguished by they're a single, they produce a single hairy fleece, and all other goats can produce an undercoat. So any other of all the other goats, any other goats can be cashmere goats if they live in the right environment. So an environment that's cold and harsh and has like lots of wind, like Tibet and Mongolia, Inner Mongolia, are places where cashmere goats thrive. And even if you keep goats here in the United States in your little Pennsylvania farm, you'll notice from, seasonally that they might even shed a little bit of undercoat after the winter. So all other goats, milk goats and just regular goats can produce an undercoat that could be cashmere. But of course, it's not all nice cashmere. It's just, that's a trait of theirs. Angora goats seem to have been, I'm sorry, I keep starting with Angora when I mean to start with domesticated goats. So domesticated goats seem to have descended from the family of animals that include the ibex, and remains of goats date back almost 10,000 years. So Neolithic farmers were herding goats. That gave them ready access to milk and meat and dung for fires, and bones, hair, and sinew were the whole goat can be used by or was used by early man to in clothing, building, and tools. And they make a really good animal for nomadic people to cultivate as well, because they can be moved easily from place to place, and they don't need to graze in a clumped flock. They tend to like to spread out and work an area kind of together but separately. So you can have goats graze a field and get it really well cleaned out in a really even way, just with a small number of goats, because they do spread out. Excuse me. They are goats like our bovines, like sheep are, and they can crossbreed with sheep. So there have been it is thought that there has been some crossbreeding along the way that that kind of strengthens the bloodlines as well as the fiber producing capability of goats. There are about 300 different breeds of goats. Female goats are referred to as does or nannies, and intact males are bucks or billies, and their offspring are kids. Castrated males are wethers, and that's the same as for sheep. They're very intelligent and really well coordinated. They do well in a wide variety of terrains, including very steep mountain areas. They can be, they have really good balance. And their grazing ability, their ability to eat a wide variety of substances and to digest them and turn it into nutrition for their body makes them very economical to raise as well. So for in areas where socioeconomics are such that agricultural people are on the lower socioeconomical end, goats are a really good way for them to be able to produce a variety of goods, a variety of food types, and have some kind of income without a lot of support to the animals themselves. They can be herded in, you don't have to keep your eye on them so much. I remember even like hiking in California and coming across goats, like domestic goats they would have with bells on and everything, just to, just when you're hiking, they've wandered away from the farm, but they go back at the end of the day. So you can let them go in the morning and let them walk around and kind of have their way and find what they want, and they will come back. They're very kind of docile that way. And while they can eat anything, they have like this funny reputation for eating tin cans and cardboard and stuff like that. Obviously, tin cans probably not digestible by then, but they do eat, they will out of curiosity try to eat cotton clothing and cardboard and anything that they perceive might have some nutritional value. They don't like inedible or contaminated materials. So they're very good at preserving, at keeping themselves from getting sick on something that's absolutely not, not good for them. Let's see. And their plant diet is really varied. So they do get a wide variety of vitamins and minerals from plants because they're willing to eat so many different kinds. And that allows them to be easily raised as a free range animal. Let's see. So fleece bearing goats have been raised in Asia since the 5th century BC. And, people who are religious or even follow mythology know that garments from goat hair are referred to like in texts that go way, way back. Let's see. The other nice thing about mohair itself, the hair that the Angora goat produces, is that being a luster fiber, it takes dye so beautifully and brilliantly. So it absorbs dye well, and in a very saturated, you can get really nice saturated colors, but then light will reflect off of those colors and just bring them to life. So the fiber was highly prized for fabrics for royalty and what people who are wealthy, and as well as for fabrics for the home and bedding and things like that. Let's see. The province where the Angora was really first and best raised was called Ankara. It's the central Anatolian plains of Turkey. And that's where the Angora goat gets its name from. The goats, and this is similar to, when we talked about merino a couple months ago. So being raised in Asia Minor and Africa, that kind of Middle East area, Persia is another area that that this goat is, was popularly raised very early on. They were exported to Spain, just like merino sheep, and maybe even alongside merino sheep. And Spanish royalty sort of like fell upon them with, greed. So Spain tried to, just like with merinos, put restraints on how far outside of the Spanish borders Angora goats could be raised. And they had a very tight hold on exporting fabrics and yarns made from Angora. And so for several centuries, the distribution of Angora around the world was quite small and highly controlled. In addition to that, they're a fairly delicate animal. Angora goats don't like being, they don't respond well in weather that's cold and damp. They're very vulnerable in the very early in life, in the first few days of life, and many of them don't make it, past that point if they're in the wrong environment. So that hot, dry, kind of desert or semi-desert climate is more appealing to them. To get a good mohair coat or mohair fleece, a good diet really is important. The fleece that they grow is also can be quite dense, especially with those ringlet type goats. And so they're extremely susceptible to parasites that get under the coat and next to the skin. So that can actually break the coat, a coat that has kind of been allowed to grow out of control or grow too long. One of the and gives you another good reason to shear more than once a year or even more than twice a year. Like I said, depending on you know, what mill you're working with, your producer may need to shear 3 times a year instead of just twice. Let me see. I'm just going, I have notes here because I can't remember it all anymore. I wish I could. One of the cool things about mohair is that modern spinning and weaving and production equipment has actually been a good thing for this fiber. And I'm not talking about chemicals, but just, you know, the use of machinery to spin and weave and process Angora fiber it actually acts as an enhancement to the fiber. And I haven't been able to dive very deeply into why that is, but my suspicion would be that being a long wool and a luster wool, that mechanized spinning and weaving will stretch the fiber a little bit more, and also processes like drafting and combing and carding are all brushing it, you know, kind of refining the length and the silkiness of the fiber as it goes. And those actions upon the fiber bring out its best luster, and kind of it has the fiber has the tensile strength, not just to withstand mechanized processing, but to actually be enhanced by it. And that's something I'm always looking for more information about facts like that. They don't just drop into my lap though. You know, once in a while they do, but sometimes you have to put a story together over a period of years, and I do my best, but I can't answer that question as exactly as to why. I can only give you my suspicions. Once the what do I want to say? The supply chain, once the supply chain of mohair out from Turkey and out from Spain was established, so that mohair could get out to Europe, it was rapidly taken up by people all over Europe. The mills and processors across Europe very quickly mastered ways to spin and weave and make the most of this fiber during the Industrial Revolution, when everything was just exploding. I mean, so much was happening, so many advances were made so quickly that this kind of hit the supply chain in a really good time period. It was so the beauty with which Europeans could make fabrics and yarns with Angora was so impressive to the Sultan of Turkey, that he then opened up, really opened up the floodgates in terms of being able to produce it. And Turkey was the place where the highest amount of Angora was produced up to that point. That's then then the shortages began to happen because once the fiber spread throughout Europe and more people, it became popular in more and more places, and especially to wear it in some of these colder climates was especially appealing. The supply of Angora, which up until that point had been adequate for just about anything, was suddenly not nearly enough. Fortunately, in the meantime, Angora goats had been taken to South Africa in the first half of the 1800s and successfully established there. And so South Africa became the second largest producer of Angora and a really good, reliable source. They were introduced into the United States in the mid 1800s in kind of a trade of gifts. So this Dr. James Davies was presented with 7 adult goats by the Sultan of Turkey in appreciation for services that he had supplied to Turkey for in teaching them to grow cotton and to develop a cotton trade. And if you might remember now, you know, a lot of cotton comes from Asia, almost all of it. Almost all of the world supply comes from Asia, mostly China, but it is grown in Turkey and Iraq and Iran as well. So, you know, this is where I just love that, you know, even back then when travel was still not as widespread as it is, there were people in the plant sciences and I guess just naturalists in general were traveling at great risk to discover products from other countries, to study plants and animals and methods of farming in other countries. And where in other countries, their productions might focus on 1 or 2 things, in the United States, just like with people who come here, the sheer number of different plants and animals and farming methods that suit this country is astounding, because it's such a big country and we have so many different climates, you know, enclosed within our borders, and people and explorers and naturalists were able to go out and bring all this home to us. You know, we wouldn't have all these bare naked wools produced in the US if it wasn't for people who were positively curious about other cultures back then and throughout our history. So I just hope all the time that we can continue that wonderful exchange with the whole rest of the world and learning from each other, to keep not just in a selfish way to supply us knitters, but we're so lucky that we have this craft to experience the fruits of all that cooperation. And I just hope we can keep it going, you know. Let's see. Are there any questions about the kind of cultural aspects of, I can try to answer, but anybody have questions about history and culture of this fiber?
I'm just curious, you were talking about when they were brought to the US. My understanding was that at some point, Texas was the second highest producer of mohair after South Africa.
Yeah.
I know that it still is, and there's been a whole change in terms of, it used to be a big area for processing and milling, but then a lot of that most of that's exported now.
No, that's true. This gift of the first, you know, 7 adult goats flourished in the southwestern United States. So the Southwest is still the heart of our own mohair production. There are good sized farms in other places in the Midwest, and the East Coast has quite a few bigger farms. But when I say bigger farms on the East Coast, we're talking, 100 and something goats. But anytime you're talking about the Western production of wool, mohair, whatever, you're talking thousands. You're talking ranch sized operations, because that's the only way to do it and be able to survive, is to do it in larger quantity. But yes, today, so that original flock of very small flock of Angora goats thrived in the Southwest, where there are, the grasslands and shrublands of Texas are really well suited to them, as well as the dry climate and lack of, insects that thrive on humidity. And so today, Texas produces 90% of American mohair, and joins South Africa and Turkey as the leading producer of the world supply. Let's see. The average goat in the United States is sheared twice a year and produces approximately 5.5 pounds of mohair per shearing, with a staple length of between 4.5 and 6 inches. Let's see. Just going over that information about the ringlets. Those are actually, it's not a haphazard. The two fleece types, the ringlet and the flat lock, are actually have a type. So the ringlet type is called C type, and B type is the flat hair lock. I don't know that there's an A lock. I don't have that in my information here. The flat lock, where the ringlets are very shiny and narrow, they're like a pencil or even a straw. And you'll see both types in the photographs in the book chapter that I wrote. You'll see some with ringlets and some with flat locks. It's not, as I remember, it's not something that you breed for. It's just, again, along with coloration, your goats are either going to have one type or the other, and it's not necessarily something that that producers breed for, because it doesn't have any real purpose. The fiber in one type of fleece isn't better or shinier or stronger or finer than the other. Although the flat lock will appear bulkier and coarser, it's not necessarily.
And is that,
Yeah.
I've played around with the kid mohair, that's the little curly locks. How much does that change? Is that a characteristic that's in those goats? And then when they get bigger, then the locks kind of loosen up as the hair gets a little coarser. Is that what happens? But it doesn't go from kid mohair, curly lock to flat lock.
Correct. It's a little bit like alpacas, where Surrey alpacas develop that ringlet formation. They have those long silky ringlets, but Huacaya alpaca just have the regular crimp, and they're fluffy like a bottle brush. It's kind of like that, where you're either one or the other. It is a genetic type, so it doesn't change over the lifetime the way the diameter of the fiber does. So I suspect that what happens with your ringlets is that the fiber diameter, the micron diameter, is going to change, and that's going to change the size of the ringlet. It's probably going to loosen up or look heavier or rounder. Whereas the finer the hair, the tighter the ringlet can grow. Let's see. I referred before a little bit to the coloration of the goats and the fact that they can produce different colors of fiber. And just like all fiber animals, you know, colored goat was not as desirable until the late 80s. You know, something about the resurgence of interest in handcraft with wools and other fibers caused a simultaneous interest in cultivating colored fiber for the handcraft industry. It's not something that the commercial industry is especially interested in. It really is a specialty item. So currently, colored fiber is still more rare. It's not as it is specialty farmers who raise it. So our producers that are producing the fiber that we buy for our yarns are focusing on raising colored flocks. Like I said before, the genetics are not easy to determine, but in general, if you have a whole bunch of colored goats, you're going to end up with more colored goats, but not necessarily. Like our previous producer explained to us, you know, he would generally he focused on colored fiber. So he wasn't cultivating white fiber really at all on purpose. And still, about 50% of his lambs or his kids would be white or some shade of very light fiber. He had 2 very black goats there, like in the barn that day that we were there. And he's like, these guys could produce anything. He's like, I'm constantly amazed at the whiteness of some of their offspring. So it's a curious and you know, still as yet to be determined science. Although our previous producer was a horticulture professor, so he had and his flock book was absolutely meticulous. It was a work of art. So he had every single goat, what their offspring was. He had you know, what their, you know, you wouldn't test every goat for genetics, but you can kind of tell by their offspring and when you're breeding them what their genetics might be, and from the fleece that they produce. And he had, you know, just copious notes on every single goat, trying to produce, you know, more of the blackest fleece. But some years it just didn't happen. So we always have to take what we can get that's acceptably good quality. And that's why sometimes we won't have that dark charcoal gray yarn, because we just can't get the dark fiber, or we can't get it in the quality that we want, or the price that would make it tolerable. We always work with producers to do our best, and that's why, you know, we always say not to goad you into making purchases, but if you see something you like, you should buy it when you see it, because it just doesn't always come along. I know with our previous producer, we had this very dark gray of the Chabris for one season, and everybody wanted it, and everybody keeps asking us about it. And you know, that's why we're so pleased with this Michael color that we were able to get for the club, because it really is a nice dark and very blue gray.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
Is this the original color that was from the goats, or was this a mixture?
This is the black Angora fleece and white combed merino.
Okay.
So
Okay.
so that's
Yeah.
how black it was. That 60% of this is white, and it's still,
So, mhm.
yeah. Whereas the Simone is a silver gray.
Yeah.
You know, it's still a black goat, but it's a black goat that is maybe aged a little bit, or the fiber is, there's a lot of white in the coat. It might even be spotted.
Mhm.
And then this is the Wayne definitely comes from a brown goat. So that's your, you know, kind of taupey brown. It's not a red, it's a brown, and the white is white. And we have all of these colors. We have all of them in the two different yarn weights, the lace and the fingering. And I've knit with, I haven't knit a garment with the fingering weight yet, but my sense is in swatching with it, I feel like it's a heavier fingering. And yardage wise, it's not, you know, it has plenty of yardage, but it has a weight to it. So it could even, my feeling is you could probably substitute it into patterns that call for like a sport weight or a light sport weight, like the C fret, you know, our favorite. We have a C fret cardigan that I knit with Coopworth Sport, our Cooper Sport. And Coopworth is another long luster fiber, even more like mohair than Romney. And I bet you could make a C-fret cardigan just like that with this yarn. It strikes me as being very similar in the way that it looks and the way that it handles and the kind of weight of it in your hand. So I feel like side by side, those would be fairly equal. If you do have, if you've been in our clubs long enough to have a skein of that Coopworth in your stash, it's really lovely stuff, but it is a very lustrous fiber with a lot of that springiness to it that the long wools have. Let's see. I think I covered everything that's in my notes. Just getting back to one last little note about the uses of the I was saying, you know, it makes really good soundproofing, and that includes like when you go to a theater, and especially those classic old theaters, the seats are all upholstered in mohair, and that's why, because it provides sound absorption and acoustic, it softens the acoustics of, you know, music presentations and movies and things like that. So just next time you're at the movies, just in an old theater, just appreciate the you know, that old goat. and you know, and a real tribute to how durable those fabrics are, because I don't think any theater today could afford to upholster their seats in mohair. But you know, if you're sitting on mohair in a theater, it's probably decades old. For good or for bad, it's probably very old. Any questions or comments or anything?
I was going to say, speaking of durability, I have ripped out my 4 rows and it's knitting up just like new right now as I recast on. So
Yeah, yeah.
I'm pretty happy with that.
Yeah, and that's really the long wool at work. It is really durable. It doesn't pill in that way at all. Anybody else have questions? I'm so sorry about the screw up with the passwords. I feel like a lot more people would be here if that didn't happen. But yeah, we'll try to fix that up. We kind of have to work with the technology we have, but a couple announcements. We've got we'll be at the Great Lakes Fiber Show next weekend, which is a regional Midwest show. If you're anywhere in the in the Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, Kentucky area, and you want to take a drive next weekend to a real sheep and wool show. It's a small show, but it has all the components of the bigger shows, and that makes it a little bit more, it's very family friendly, and you'd be supporting producers and artisans and fiber people right in our area. Then in June, we will be starting a new knit along, our summer mystery knit along, which is also a mystery wool along. And I'm sure that most of you that are here already know about this, but in case you don't, we'll be exploring some all new wool yarns that are a secret.
Yay.
And we'll be exploring them week by week, so it'll be a real exploration. And the wool types and yarn types will be revealed as we go, along with a mystery project. It's a rectangular piece. You can make, you can make any kind of rectangular piece with this pattern, but and it's very simple. I would say beginner, intermediate, skill level. We're not getting anything too complicated, but you can buy a kit, or you can, starting on June 1st, you can buy the pattern only option and either pull from your stash or get together with a friend or a group of friends and do a secret stash trade-off where you trade yarns that they don't tell you about. It's just any DK yarns should work, or light worsted yarns should work. And it should be lots of fun. We're as with all our knit alongs, we try to get as many people involved as possible. We'll be fundraising for dog rescue this summer. Like last year it was for the bee sanctuary. This year it's for a local dog rescue called JJ's Rough Roads, where Cardigan and now Aaron, our newest family member, came from. So we want to get as much fundraising as we can for Ramona and her team, including me. I'm on her team. So tell your friends. We'll have donation only pages available. We do have them available for friends and family who are not knitters, who might want to support our cause. And there'll be prizes and all the usual knit along stuff. We'll be meeting on Wednesdays and Saturdays for that. Audrey?
I just have the question, is it possible to get a second skein still?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We have, because we just released this colorway. So you guys were the first to get this shade. And so we still have plenty of this. We are running a little low on the Serena and Simone shades, but we already have our next order in. So never fear, we're keeping up with it as much as we can. As long as there's fiber being produced, we can make this yarn. So anybody else have a question? And then so our mystery knit along we start knitting on June 9th and it ends on July 27th, just before the Rhinebeck sweater knit along starts. Trying to think of any other, and of course we have another barn box coming in July, so another new secret yarn. Something we haven't done before. So yeah, it's amazing that we keep being able to come up with, we still haven't really like shipped anything from our regular lineup. I don't think. Kika?
Could you say a little bit more about the differences between the lace weight and the fingering weight? I mean, are they spun pretty similarly? Just a little?
Yeah, they're spun similarly. They're just, one is the fingering weight is heavier. So they're both 2-ply construction. The blend is the same, 40% mohair and 60% merino. And by the way, I just picked up a skein where the where it's wrong. So I'm holding a skein of Simone that says 60% mohair and 40% wool, and that's wrong. But it is 40% mohair and 60% wool. And the yardage on the lace weight is 750 yards. I was able to knit the petite version of the shawl, of the Birds in a Thicket shawl, with far less than one skein. Like I had probably 100 or 150 yards left over. So it's very economical as well. And the fingering weight has 450.
Very generous.
Yeah. So that's in keeping with our other fingering weight yarns. So, you know, by the pound, you're getting the same yardage. Again, I haven't knit a garment with this, but Barb knit the little Irish shawl with it. And I would say you want to, and she knit the little Irish shawl with the stated needle size, which I think was like 3 or 4. And it seemed like that was a little tight to me. So I think you could probably knit this fingering yarn up to size, like on needle size 7 for lace, and probably like 6 for a garment. Just, you know, your own knitter variations taken into consideration. I could probably knit it, maybe even lace on size 8 needles, depending on how lacy I wanted that to be. Sheila?
And are we gonna be doing the Monday and Saturday things up until the next knit along starts, even though the
Wednesday.
lace along just ended?
It's Wednesday and Saturday, and yes.
Yeah, okay, I thought what I said, but thank you, okay.
Yeah, so the lace along meetups will continue until June 9th. Except I won't be here next Saturday because we'll be at the Worcester show. So I won't be here for that. Yeah. Anybody else? And by the way, I didn't really say much about the design because I got talking about other stuff, but it's so funny, that shawl design, I actually designed it when we got the Kent lace last year. And I put the project down because I can't remember, I was working on sweaters and I ran into, like, I had to figure out the next section and I didn't want to spend time on it. So it like literally laid there for a few months. And then I picked it up again and started working on it and, you know, thought, why didn't I, what's wrong with me? And then we were able to pull the mohair yarn, you know, we were able to put that project together, you know, which I never thought we were going to be able to do it. And so then I had this pattern that I had designed for the Ken lace, but because the mohair lace was the same specs, I knit one in that too, and they just worked out perfectly. And I really love that piece. It's I always like those lace patterns that are all like crisscrossing lines and leaves and stuff and look like a tangle of shrubbery. So that's kind of my take on the design, I guess. Well, I don't want to keep you much longer unless somebody has a question. Anybody? Okay.
Thank you.
I never intend to
Thanks
run
so
on it.
much.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Y'all
Anne.
would-
Bye, everybody.
It was so great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Anne.